Hi, I'm Adam Smith. I'm the Managing Director of Polypipe Middle East here in the Gulf. One of the key trends we've seen over the last few years is perhaps an integration of what we would call SUDS, a Sustainable Urban Design Strategy, where we're looking at not just dealing with the volumes of water we're doing in the urban environment, but where we're looking at quality of that water, certainly the quantity, if you look back to the floods of recent times in this region, but also the integration of things like health and well-being into design, and also the introduction or reintroduction of biodiversity. I think one of the other key trends that we're looking at is the substitution of legacy materials. So traditionally, large drainage infrastructure systems will be built from concrete pipes, vitrified clay, lots of issues with those, with in situ failures and water losses. And we're seeing a big swing towards now more modern plastic alternatives where they're less carbon to produce, they're certainly less carbon to ship due to the weight, but also cheaper to install, and the longevity on these systems is often double. There's probably a two-edged sword version of that answer. I mean, one is sometimes very slow. Some of the procurement frameworks here are just not in place for people to adopt innovation easily. But also can be very quick. I mean, because we're dealing with generally one client on big infrastructure schemes, the asset owner, if they decide to switch, it happens. So the adoption can be either very, very quick or extremely slow. I think generally overall, the civils industry is quite slow to adopt these globally. So that's nothing compared to what we see here. But if you look at some of the major clients now, there's not only an environmental need or a sustainable need, but there's also an ROI. There's a cost benefit to these solutions as well. And there's nothing that gets people to the table quicker than reducing cost. If you take things like Dubai South, so the infrastructure catching up with development is a real problem on every aspect of the infrastructure. But if you look at water and take stormwater, for instance, dealing with all the water on the plot when you don't have a connection to a municipality pipe or an outfall is quite a challenge. But you can break it up. We work with a lot of clients. It doesn't matter how big or small. One of the misconceptions of water management that it has to be done at scale, and that's not true. You can look at one villa, you can look at 1,000 villas, you can look at a huge urban area that includes commercial buildings, maybe airports, but you can break it down into smaller chunks. And the more you do that, the easier it is to manage on those chunks. But one of the things that we're finding is obviously that rapid urbanisation. When you're designing these solutions, you've got to figure out what it's going to look like 30 years, 50 years ahead. It's not just for today. And we're finding that's the curse of the short-termism, right? We're going to use the rainfall data that's 30 years out of date. We're going to design a system. We're not putting extra capacity in the networks for climate change. We're not thinking what other urban areas are going to be using this infrastructure in perhaps 30 years' time. So there's a bit of forethought in that design, but it is a challenge. But we are seeing systems that have been designed for temporary use. So people are thinking, right, I'm going to have a big connection here in 20 years' time, but what am I going to do in the meantime? So we are working on a number of projects like that. We're one of the region's leading providers of climate and water management. So it starts within the building. So part of what the Genuit Group under climate management is all about air quality. And when you talk about things like public health and drainage systems, having conversations with lots of developers on lots of type of products, there is no compromise when it comes to public health and people's lives. That's right from workers' accommodation all the way up to 7-star luxury hotels. It doesn't change, the principles don't change. So some of the things that we do, early engagement is with clients and design to look at how we comply to standards and codes, how we offer innovative products in those systems that help protect the people in those buildings from foul smells, which is obviously part of the failure of a drainage system. The price of property, who wants to buy a 10 million dirham apartment overlooking the Burj Khalifa? and it smells of drainage and sewage. But there's a serious side to that in that smell is quite some harmful gases, and the protection of that built environment is the ultimate goal of that system. So we work with a number of consultancies and a number of clients to look at first principally the design element, and then we work with the installation side as well. So the execution side is just as good as the design intent. So we follow the projects right the way through from conception to delivery, making sure they've got access to the best advice, the best products, but also looking at things like how we comply to the latest design codes as well. We're moving away from traditional drainage systems. So traditionally, again, I'll pick stormwater because it's easy, get it away from the building as quickly, as safely as possible. And then lots of buildings becomes a bigger and bigger problem. Now we're starting to look at strategies like source control, where we're dealing with the water where it falls or where it's needed. So we're not only just capturing and releasing, we're starting to look at how we reuse that, cyclically reuse that on plot, because water's valuable, right? But it's not just stormwater. If you look at the billions of gallons of clean, condensate recovery out of each building, we're in the middle of summer now here, you've got air-conditioned buildings of every type in this city, and the byproduct of air conditioning is a very clean condensate water. So if you imagine the billions and billions of gallons of water that's available to you, but we treat it very differently as a waste product. We still want to get it away, that old drainage philosophy of getting it away from the building as quickly as possible. Where if you change that strategy and you think, well, that's actually an important asset, how do we use that? So you can use that for cooling, you can use that for irrigation. The volume of potable clean water that still gets used for irrigation in the Middle East is quite significant, so we can eradicate that. So it's about looking holistically at these challenges and not just looking at single water sources and trying to deal with that. You think living in the desert, it's not that feasible, but it is very feasible if you look at water as a holistic need. So how can you capture, looking at all the buildings that we can see out the window today, how can you capture all of that condensate and reuse it for irrigation? So I think there is a tremendous amount of water needed to achieve these in the Middle East, because it's not naturally abundant. We don't have natural water courses. Even in Abu Dhabi with the aquifer, we're taking water 20 times faster than we can perhaps recharge it. So these things are not very sustainable. So instead of looking at water as, hey, we produce water, let's use it and get rid of it, you need to think of it very cyclical, and you need to look at how you reuse that water, particularly when you're doing things like urban trees. So where urban trees are great, they line our sort of boulevards and the road areas, but all we do is throw water on them and hope that they survive, and then they end up sort of cracking the infrastructure around them. There are systems where we can create tree pits using our solutions, we can deliver water in, we can store water there, so we can control water, and these things can be used as first line defence in stormwater management. Can actually absorb a lot of water when there's, let's say, a freak weather incident like we had recently, a 1 in 100 year storm. But they can also discharge water as well, and then you can start cleaning that water in the same sort of environment. You can start removing pollutants, fuel oils. But again, that's quite a detailed approach, and you need a lot of people involved. So it's not just about landscaping.